He told you that my name is Ed Williams. Usually my wife is with me, but my mother-in-law is not well, so she couldn't be with me today. I'm a home inspector. I have a radon testing lab. I'm not a public speaker. So if I seem nervous up here, it's because I am. I'm a returned prodigal son. As a teenager, I drifted away from the church. I made some very poor decisions. I got into smoking and drinking, other immoral behavior. I got busy in the rat race we call life. And before I knew it, over 40 years had passed. I'm going to tell you a little story about my return and what inspired me to start this ministry we call FARM, Former Adventist Recovery Ministry. In 1992, my youngest sister went to the doctor, just a normal physical. He found something in her blood work that he didn't like, but he had no idea what he was looking at. Well, instead of waiting for and trying to research it on his own, that would have caused delay, he faxed to every specialty he could find in the United States saying, "What am I looking at? I need your help." Doctor up in Boston gave him a call and said, "Get her up here right now. It's mesothelioma." Usually, when they have diagnosed it, over 95% of it at times, it's already too late. They got her up there. They took out a lung. They actually lost her on the table twice, but she made it through. After her recovery in about 1995, her husband went through his midlife crisis, and they were separated for almost 5 years. Well, my wife and I had both been through divorces. We knew what it was like to be lonesome and have that sense of failure and all of that goes with it. So we thought that we would take Charlotte under our wing and help her through it. Little did we know that that was God putting us under her wing. Charlotte was an absolute good Christian Adventist. We met her on Thursday nights for dinner every week. We vacationed together. Sometimes we even went to church with her. Even though Charlotte's life seemed to be falling apart, her health was poor, her husband was gone, her youngest son got into drinking and smoking, her job of 35 years disappeared because the company she worked for was sold. She never got discouraged. She never complained. My wife kept on saying, "You know, I'd like to be more like Charlotte. I'd like to be more like Charlotte." In 1999 or early 2000, Pete came back and asked for forgiveness. Now, I wasn't back in the church at that point. Charlotte accepted him back. I told my wife, "He hurts her again, I'll kill him." I meant it. But they made it work. We still met him on Thursday nights, stayed very, very close, and around Thanksgiving of 2003, Charlotte started having lower back problems. She'd had a bad back for years, and that's what they attributed to, but it just kept getting worse. Finally, Pete insisted that they go to the doctor and find out what was going on. She went to the doctor on Monday. He said the lab work would be back around Wednesday. Wednesday came and went. Thursday came and went. Friday, the pain was so severe that they had to admit her to control the pain. On Sabbath, it came back that it was terminal. A week and a half later, she was gone. We were crushed. We were all with her when she died. How could the good Lord take this godly person at age 59? Then I realized, had that been me, I'd have been eternally lost. Carol says, "You know, I want to be more like Charlotte. We need to go to church." Well, Carol wasn't raised in the religion. She had never gone to church. I said, "I agree, but if we do, we're only going to the Adventist church." She said, "Why?" I said, "It's the only church that just teaches the Bible and not a bunch of tradition." She said, "What are you talking about?" So we started talking. When Carol went into Bible studies, I knew I was in deep trouble. I'd given up smoking in '87, but I was still drinking. I was putting away between probably 40 and 50 drinks a week. I knew that was going to be a terrible problem. On the Friday that she finished her final Bible study, I said to her, Carol, are you with me on this? She said, yes. I took 25 of a 30-pack and gave it away in the campground. Now, I should have thrown it away, but I could have gone back and gotten it. You know, I haven't even wanted one since, and I didn't do that. It was that little miracle that taught me that I wasn't just to come back to the church. I was supposed to do something. In September of 2005, I was rebaptized. The joy of it was, my wife was in the tank, being baptized. My parents and my sister are going to be shocked when I show up. That's delightful. In preparation for whatever the good Lord had for me, I had no idea what it was. I started reading and studying, trying to make up for lost time. I went through over 30 of Ellen White's works. I read Venden, G. Edward Reed, Batchelor, Finley, everything I could get my hands on. Then it dawned on me, who better to go after those that have been away but somebody that's been there. So I looked around the church, trying to find out who was doing it. I couldn't find them. I finally found that there was somebody in the North American division that was doing it on a part-time basis. Problem is, he was out in Oregon. I met with him once. That was as far as it got. So Shirley and my wife and I, we started this little ministry. In my 42 years away from the church, only one time did somebody come to find out why. When I came back to the church, my name was still on the books. We got to stop that. What is your attitude toward those that have drifted away? Is it like the prodigal son's brother? Is it, well, that's their choice. Just leave them alone. Tell you a little story. Let's say that you go camping and you're told, don't go far because it's easy to get lost. Everybody else is playing games and so forth. You say, what? I'm not going far. I won't get lost. Well, let's say you get lost. Now, should the rest of the campers say, well, it's their choice, just leave them alone? Or should they put together a search party? It's time that we started putting together a search party. In the United States, it's estimated that there's over 1 million Adventists that have drifted away. In the Washington and Baltimore area, it's estimated 150,000 of them. Well, I can't do that by myself. Your pastor doesn't have time to do it because between the duties of the church, visiting the sick, the discouraged, and everything else, he doesn't have enough hours in the day to do it. It's going to take the church and all of you together to make this thing work. The Lord didn't give us the parable of the prodigal son, the lost coin and the lost sheep, just as a cute little story. Gave it to us for a reason. Ellen White has over 20 articles on the prodigal son and his brother. It's there for a reason. My studies of current events after I came back, I was astounded where we are in history. We've always had famines. We've always had pestilence. We've always had earthquakes. We've always had all of these things, but we've never had them in a confluence of events like we're having right now. If you open the little book that was given to you, The Clock of Time, on page 9, there's a little chart there. That little chart, if it doesn't wake you up, and that last decade that's on there, there was 2 more years to go in that decade, because this was printed in 2008. There are many, many prophecies that are and or have been fulfilled already. I'm going to have Shirley read a little article in here. It's about what Ellen White prophesied about San Francisco and Oakland and also New York. Go ahead, Shirley.
In 1903, Ellen White wrote, "San Francisco and Oakland are becoming like Sodom and Gomorrah, and the Lord will visit them. Not far hence, they will suffer under his judgments." In 1906, the massive earthquake occurred. She had another prediction, but she was not given the time frame. Let me read from the Review and Herald, July 5, 1906. "I have no light in particular in regard to what is coming on New York, only that I know one day the great buildings there will be thrown down by the turning and overturning of God's power. Death will come in all places." She followed up in Testimonies, Volume 9, 1909, as she wrote, "On one occasion, when in New York City, I was in the night season called upon to behold buildings rising story after story toward heaven. These buildings were warranted to be fireproof, and they were erected to glorify their owners and builders. The scene next passed before me was an alarm of fire. Men looked at the lofty, supposedly fireproof buildings and said, 'They are perfectly safe.' But these buildings were consumed as if made of pitch. The fire engines could do nothing to stay the destruction. The firemen were unable to operate the engines."
What does that look like, 9/11 possibly? Rather than condemn deviant lifestyles, now we that believe the Bible are considered homophobes, bigots, and so forth. This is actually a prediction put in Isaiah 5, 20 and 21, that people would declare things that are good, bad, and things that are bad, good. It's just another sign. When I returned to the church, there was no way in this world that the Adventists could be blocked from buying and selling. But the banking crisis that happened in 2008 and 9, all of the banks now are linked together. It can be done overnight. On December 31, 2011, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012 became law. This act allows the armed forces of the United States to detain even U.S. citizens without due process if they are suspected of being in aiding Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and anyone who commits a belligerent act against the U.S. government. It doesn't define what that act is. It's a bit scary. Just think about it. Matthew 24:14 tells us when Jesus will come back. It's when this gospel has been spread to the entire world. We make the mistaken assumption that we're the only ones doing this. But there's many other religions that are, in fact, spreading this gospel. They're doing it by radio, TV, internet, and it's going. The day's fast coming when we're going to have to stand up and choose either God or Satan. I believe the time is very short. Ellen White told us in the Great Controversy, page 578, 79, and 92, that the political corruption in this world or in the United States is destroying the love of justice and the regard for truth. Even in this United States, called free, Rulers and legislators, in order to secure public favor, will yield to the popular demand for the laws enforcing Sunday. With their approval rate being at around 6%, all it would take is some major problem. We've got 6 of our Supreme Court justices are Roman Catholic. Who's going to stop it? I believe that Jesus will come in my lifetime, and I'm getting old. When the first trials are set, and the first persons are, in fact, condemned to death because of the Sabbath, it will be news throughout the entire world. Court TV, the internet, satellite. It will spread worldwide immediately. At that time, people will start looking around and wondering what happened. For those of us who know the truth, for all intents and purposes, probation will close. And that's for those that are out here now who we have not brought back into the fold. People call me an alarmist. But if you look around at what's happening in this world, I think it's time to become alarmed. Ellen White said that the last events would happen in rapid succession. Look at the spread of just the homosexual marriage throughout the United States. Boom, state after state after state. Ellen White also says that there will be many who will come back, but I think they need an invitation. When the prodigal return, they're going to have bad habits. Don't condemn. Pray with them, pray for them as they get over these bad habits. Give them encouragement. Give them a reason to want to come to church. Love them back into it. As you love them back into it, the Holy Spirit will take over and will convince them of what they need to do to straighten up their act. Now, basically the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say, I've returned to the church. Pete remarried. He married a lady from Brazil. He has rededicated himself to the church. They are supporting a evangelism couple in Brazil. They've also started a school of evangelism there. So far, they have graduated probably 6 classes. There's probably close to 100 of their people going through Brazil in the previously untapped areas. Thousands have already been baptized. Now you can see what the good Lord has taken this tragedy, and the influence of this Christian lady is still there. Our churches need to develop teams to go out, to visit these people that have drifted away. Now, I will tell you this. Never do it on Sabbath unless you have an invitation. Because if you go out on the Sabbath and you catch them doing something that they shouldn't be doing, you've offended or embarrassed them, you've caused another wedge to be driven. Any other time, but Friday night and Sabbath, not unless you've been invited. But go. Each week in our church, we send out the bulletin. We send out any special events. We try to keep in contact to let them know that they're not forgotten. A little story that I'll tell you that happened one Sabbath not long ago. The pastor told me that he wanted me in the church. I had the deacon duties that day. He said, I want you in the church. I want you to hear this. A friend of ours from church, he and his wife had moved out to Colorado. About 6 months before they left, he gave me his sister's name and address. And I'll do this for anybody in this church also. I don't care where they live. I've sent packages to Argentina, I've sent them to Papua New Guinea, and so forth. But I sent a package to his sister. His sister had drifted away from the church. She'd gone out to San Francisco and joined the hippies and gotten into the drug scene out at Haight-Ashbury. They had prayed for her for years. He came to me and says, I have nothing to lose. So he gave me her name and address. She now lives in Utah. So I sent a package to her. I waited about 2 weeks after she got the package, and I contacted the pastor of the church closest to where she now lived. I said, I've sent her a package. Can you send somebody out to her home to invite her to your church? He said, sure. Well, Greg is telling the story about he moved out to Colorado, which is only several hours away, and he called his sister and said, we'd like to come up and visit. She said, sure. On Friday, she says, well, are you going to church with me tomorrow? She was not only back in church, she was teaching one of the Sabbath school classes. While I'm listening to this story, I look around the church, and I see somebody that I haven't seen there in a long time. I'm walking on air. Later that afternoon, I'm talking to a pastor friend of mine, and I'm telling him what a beautiful Sabbath I've had. He said, well, you remember you sent a package to my son, and he's back in church. What a day. The lady that I was talking about in the church is here today. She wants to say a couple of words. Come on, Faye.
Thank you, Ed. Good morning. My name is Faye Moore, and I was a backslidden Adventist. And in the 90s, my marriage disintegrated, my life disintegrated. But anyway, I went on, and all through that time, God let me know through various ways that He loved me. And He hadn't given up on me, even though I'd given up on Him. And periodically, He would just, through people, send a reminder that He loved me. He hadn't given up on me. And so eventually I remarried, and the gentleman that I remarried was not an Adventist. I wasn't an Adventist. But I said, I'd like to go to church. And so we started going to the Williamsport Church, and we would go periodically because at that time we were driving as a team together on a great big truck. And so, back and forth across the country, we weren't always home on a regular basis. But I would go, and Ed would greet us, welcome us, and then we disappeared. Well, Ed had our name. And so he would send the bulletin at church, just as he described. And another member at the church had our name, and every Christmas I would get a Christmas card from this lady. I didn't even know who she was, but she knew I was missing from the church. And this went on. There were several years, actually, of gap where I wasn't at church again. I'd kind of come in, and then had kind of gone out again. And then my second marriage fell apart. Now, for a girl that believes marriage is forever, that was really tough. And now I was without my husband. I was without an income. But the Lord kept telling me, I haven't given up on you. And neither had Ed. And neither had people at the church who I learned later were praying for me. In my absence, people were praying for me. This past October, I had surgery, and I was down visiting my daughter who lives in a suburb of Washington, D.C., And the strangest thing happened about 4 in the morning, and I'm not an early riser usually. About 4 in the morning, I woke up and I was freezing. I could not get warm. I didn't have a temperature, so it wasn't that I had an infection or anything. I just couldn't get warm. And I knew that the house was not that cold, but I couldn't get warm. So I got up, I went into the guest bathroom, I ran a hot tub of water, I got in there and soaked myself. I could not get warm. And so finally I said, I had my little dogs with me, and I said, I'm going home. The kids weren't awake. They didn't even know. They hadn't heard the tub running. They hadn't heard me up. And I said, I'm going home. I'm just miserable. I'm going home. And so I left. I would not do that. That is not something I would do as a guest in my child's home, just get up and leave. But I left. On the way home, the only way I can say is God spoke to me. It wasn't audible. I wasn't hearing a voice, but God spoke to me and said, I want you in church today. And I said, okay, I don't have a problem with that. And he said, and there's one more thing. I don't want you to say no. And I said, okay, that's weird, but I'll go with that. So I got home, called my daughter, because by the time I got home, she would be getting up and be worried. Where was I? Told her this, that I just had come home. I was uncomfortable and had come home. Got the dogs all taken care of, and I headed to church. When I got there, Evelyn Griffin, who is the wife of a former pastor of the Williamsport Church, and they're retired and they attend there now. Evelyn Williams is one of the people who had been praying for me. Evelyn Griffin, thank you. Evelyn Griffin had been praying for me. She was the Bible worker in that church. And periodically over time, she would say hello, contact me. Are you coming to church? No, but she kept praying. And so she saw me and said, come sit with me. And so I was listening to the sermon, and next thing you know, wouldn't you know, it was Communion Sabbath. Now, when you first come back to church, that wasn't something that I necessarily expected to have be. I thought the Lord's got something in store for me because I got a personal invitation, and it was communion. And so I thought, okay, I'll just sit here in the pews while everybody goes away and washes each other's feet, and I'll just listen to the sermon. It must be the sermon that the Lord wants me to participate in and hear and learn from. And Evelyn leans over to me and she said, would you be my partner? I said, Evelyn, I'm a little embarrassed because I got here under kind of unusual circumstances this morning. And I said, I haven't had my morning preparation normally, and my feet might be dirty, And she said, Faye, the disciples' feet were dirty when Jesus washed them. That doesn't matter to me. And so Evelyn served me that morning. We had come back into the sanctuary. We were sitting and waiting. And the gentleman had the servers with all the little glasses in it, and were coming along the row. And the server at the row where I was happened to be Ed. And Ed was busy attending to making sure he didn't drop what he had hold of and that he was taking care of the person as he hands it. And he leans over to me and he looks up and almost dropped it in my lap because he'd been praying for me. He and his wife had been praying for me. And here I was. And I said, good morning. He said, you're here. I said, and I have a story to tell you about that. And I shared with him what I've shared with you. And I think the not say no was to participate in the communion service because, as our pastor says, the communion is really a mini baptism. And the Lord had called me back. I had responded. And that started our new walk together again. So thank you for letting me share my story with you this morning.
Don't give up on them. By the way, you know you can't go after your own relatives. If you do, you're nagging. You know, you're causing friction in the family. So choose a friend. You go nag theirs and have them nag yours. Okay? But do it. And stay with it. We can't let them fall through the cracks. We can't let them go for 42 years without contact. It's time for a search party. It's time to go bring them home. Thank you.